Welcome to Audible Stories. The Audacious Daughter. Once upon a time a prosperous merchant lived with his daughter. He loved his child, though sometimes, despite his daughter's devotion, he secretly wished he had a son. "Father," she said, reading his thoughts running through his mind, "I am your blessing," and the merchant smiled, though his secret desire remained. One day the merchant took a bolt of cloth to the king of the land, who was weak and ill and prone to fits of temper. The merchant unrolled his cloth before the king, certain of offering pleasure. But to his dismay, the king scowled. "Your cloth is dull and faded," he cried. "How dare you offend me?" And for punishment, he banished the merchant to a lonely island off the coast. When the audacious daughter learned the news, she was distraught, but she was determined to go to her father. She would not let him live alone in his days. If he must be banished, she would surely join him. She set off at once for the seaside. At the docks, she begged sailor after sailor to take her to the islands. "I'm seeking my father," she said. But the sailors, one by one, refused. They were too afraid, for they knew if they disobeyed the king's laws, they would be executed. "We cannot help you," each sailor said. "Your father is meant to be alone and banished." But the brave daughter was determined. That night, when all the sailors were asleep, she stole into a tiny boat and, all alone, set to sail. At sunrise she reached one of an isolated islands. She walked about, asking everyone if they would tell her where she might find her father. The islanders refused, for they too feared the king's fury and his punishment. By evening she felt gloom descend upon her. With nowhere to go and no one to help her, she sought a place to sleep. Atop a cliff she spied a statue of the king. She lay upon the ground to sleep beneath king's furious gaze. She was nearly asleep when she heard the sound of weeping. She stood and peered around the statue and saw a young girl struggling with a priest who was trying to push her over the cliff. "Stop! Stop!" she cried. The priest, startled by the sound, turned to face her. Now she saw that the priest was weeping too. "Why do you cry?" she asked. "Tonight the sea serpent demands his maiden. Every year we must choose a maiden to offer him as a sacrifice. If we fail to give the serpent his toll, he will create a year of storms. Our people will be drowned. Our lands will get flooded. Take me, then," she said. "I cannot find my father and have nothing to live for without him. Let me take the place of your young maiden." And before the priest could answer, she simply dived into the sea. Down she sank until she saw the great serpent slithering out of his cave. When he spied her, he opened his huge mouth, and she saw dozens of sharp, pointed teeth and a tongue keen as an arrow. Quickly she reached for her dagger, and without a moment's hesitation, she swam toward the serpent and stabbed into his heart. At first he thrashed his tail, whipping the water, the coral, the fish, and chased her toward the surface, but suddenly he collapsed. She dived back underwater and peered inside the cave, and there she saw a small statue of the king, the man who had banished her father. Without thinking, she tied the statue to her back and swam out of the cave. The islanders would never believe the serpent was dead unless they saw for themselves. Summoning every ounce of strength, she swam to the serpent, grabbed him by his horns and pulled him behind her. Then she began to swim toward shore. Meanwhile, on land, the priest and the maiden were offering prayers of thanks for her sacrifice. They were amazed when they looked up and saw the brave maiden swimming toward shore, pulling the serpent behind her. Overcome with joy, they ran to help her to pull the monster onto the beach. Safe on shore, she then untied the statue from her back and placed it beside the serpent. The priest bowed his head. Many years ago, he said, an enemy of the king had cursed him and threw his statue into the sea. Ever since that day the king has been ill and cruel. No one could cure him. We must send news of your great deed and sacrifice to the king. When the messenger arrived to the palace and gave the king the news, he was delighted to find him healthy as never before. This brave and audacious young girl is to be thanked and will be rewarded, the king announced. Before long news spread across the land. The king is healthy again. And the people were filled with joy. The king sent at once for the young courageous girls to come to the palace for her reward. She came to the king and said, I would like my father to be released as my reward. The king at once declared to get her father and said, You are free to go, your daughter has saved you and us all. She should be richly rewarded, but the only reward she asked the king was her father's return. The father was so very happy to hear that his audacious daughter loves him so much. She embraced her father. With tears in his eyes, he said to her, You are, indeed, a blessing for us from the Almighty. If you like the story, please do like, share and subscribe. Thank you for listening.